Good evening and welcome to Boston Media Theory. I'm Marcus Breen. This is a show where we talk about various things to do with media, with theory and with Boston. Obviously, it might include any number of people and any number of interests: academics, researchers, consultants, activists, social movement workers, any number of people, and including, of course, creative people such as poets and, I'm happy to say, playwrights. So tonight we have with us Ronan Noone, and we're going to talk about Ronan's work as a playwright. We're going to talk about writing, theatre in Boston, and also take up, perhaps, if you like, the theme about what it's like being an Irish person in Ireland as a writer and then working in the theatre. So, Ronan, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here, Marcus.
Great to see you. So what is it like in terms of, just jumping straight in before we get to a little bit of personal history, what is it like being an Irish person working in the theatre in Boston?
It was marvellous. Yeah, Boston gave me a platform on which to be able to be creative. I remember I went to Sundance at one stage back in 2000s, and I met an Irish dramaturg out there, and I said, if I want to put on some plays over in Ireland, now that I've immigrated to America, he said, I wouldn't do that. He said, playwrights are 2 a penny over there. I'm like, all right, I better stay here. So maybe the otherness of being an Irish immigrant to America opened some doors and allowed me to tell some stories from that perspective. Sure. And I think at this stage now I kind of bridge the gap between what it's like to live in America, be an immigrant in America and come from another country, and not unlike Eugene O'Neill in the way that marries that immigrant kind of lifestyle, even though he grew up and was born here.
Well, let's jump right into that. I know that Eugene O'Neill is a reference point.
Yes.
For your work. What are the specifics of that reference point? Is it immigration?
It's not necessarily immigration. I think, well, first it's a playwright, right? And also a playwright with such skill and genius that knows so much to learn from that. And then looking at his early plays, he often took on immigration as one of his major themes. And then looking at his family in something like Long Day's Journey into Night and realizing his father kind of was born in Ireland, travelled across here and became a well-known actor. And I thought that his journey mirrored something in terms of what I was trying to do as well. And so I could make the connection oftentimes more with his father than I do with O'Neill himself. But of course, learning the craft from O'Neill was part of the journey for me.
Right, so you've had a longish journey. How many years have you lived in the United States?
30 years now.
30 years?
This year.
And you've still got that beautiful accent.
Well, it hasn't hurt, I'll tell you that. It's
that's
great.
Right. So this is really as much about identity, isn't it? I have the same sort of questions that emerge in thinking about intercultural communication,
right,
which is one of my areas, and that is, why do people keep their accents? It's about our identity, right?
Huge. Yeah, and very much so. Like here we have an Australian accent and an Irish accent. Both of us have lived here for a long time. But I know I will talk to family on a regular basis, and my flow becomes much easier straight away, right? Mm-hmm. I'm dropping different words. I've got the nod and elbow language, the wink language that I still hold on to, and yeah, it is very much about identity.
Yeah. Well, your plays are about identity and the transformations or the challenges to identity that happen when people move from one part of the world to the other.
Yes.
How did that come about? When you came from Ireland, was the intention that you'd seen plays, maybe you'd been to the Abbey Theatre or you'd been to some other famous thing, and you had this connection, and you said, this is a way that I can express the experience of being a person, an Irish person?
I was 15, and I was growing up in a small town called Clifton in Connemara in Ireland. And the Druid Theatre Company, which is probably well known around the world, run by Gary Hines, where she was the director at the time. She was doing a play called Conversations on a Homecoming by Tom Murphy. And the town hall in Clifton. So what they did was they travelled the players from town to town. The Irish aren't necessarily theatre goers, they're much more waiting for the theatre to come to them from small town to small town. And and they were subsidised by the government, so it was great. That was how in the sticks of Clifton, like out in the west coast, that you actually got to see this culture coming through. And so they put this play on with these men on the stage in the town hall, and the town hall filled up for the 2 nights, I think, that they played there. And it was in February. And the opening line of the play, I believe, was "How you bollocks." And all these men were gathered in a bar, and they just tore strips off each other. And within 15 or 20 minutes, the local canon, the priest in the village, got up and walked out.
That's significant.
That was significant because I thought this mirrored how I could see life in Clifton, but they were saying things on the stage that you wouldn't say out loud necessarily. So it was like sinning without committing the sin. And I thought this was a great way of illuminating the hypocrisy that I could see around me, not just here in Clifton, but in Ireland, in terms of social conscience. And make the priest walk out after 15 minutes. I said, I want to do that. And there was a contrarian edge to it. And so there was also the sense of that you could affect people like that in a way that you hold up the mirror and they could actually see the hypocrisy around them. And whether they walked out of some sense of pride or out of some sense of shame, one way or the other, I thought this is a wonderful way to tell a story. And that's where I caught the bug, which led me to working in writing, which took me to journalism in UCG, University College Galway. And so I worked in journalism for about a year in Galway, the Connacht Tribune and Western People in Mayo, and eventually ended up out in Prague and working for the Prague Post. But at the time when I was completing my higher diploma in journalism, they told me that my stories that I was writing weren't fitting the formula. And I didn't understand at the time what that meant, but what they were telling me was I was much more of a creative writer than I was in terms of fitting the formula of the objectivity that you probably need at times in terms of journalism, and not so much lyricism, which then led me to write plays. And the first play I wrote then was about the church abuse in Ireland. And you'd see stories in the newspaper, and I often wondered why this wasn't becoming much more available, why wasn't it a part of the conversation. And I immigrated to America with one of those plays in my pocket. And then I ended up down in Martha's Vineyard, where I ended up working in bars and painting houses and whatever odd jobs there were. I said, this is wonderful. If you're going to come to America and immigrate, Martha's Vineyard is a great place to go.
In the summer especially.
In the summer especially, right? And you're bartending and whatever. This is just marvellous. But I knew after about 3 or 4 years I couldn't keep doing this. This wasn't what I wanted to do. So I took the play out of my back pocket, and I asked the local theatre down there, Martha's Vineyard Playhouse, which is a wonderful theatre down there, and I said, what do you do if you want to learn more about the skills? And they said, I think Boston University have a programme. And so I looked that up and submitted the play, and they admitted me in, and we workshopped that play with Derek Walcott and Kate Snodgrass.
No, really?
And he took me under his wing very much so, and encouraged me, and gave me great endorsement in terms of it. And I took that play and we ended up bringing it to the Kennedy Centre. And it was caught by the Boston Globe just as the church crisis was breaking here at the same time. And so the play was a prescient in terms of that. And I didn't look back after that.
Well, you had the good fortune to have not only Derek Walcott as a mentor,
Yes.
you had the good fortune, unfortunately, to have an insight into the abuse
Yes.
by the Catholic Church and by priests in the church.
Yeah, you could see it, and you could see the effect it had on people.
Absolutely.
And it was a story that I ended up telling in a bar, not unlike the Tom Murphy play that took place in the bar. And I could see how you could put people's souls on the stage, and just like an onion, you peel away until eventually you just came to the core root of the problem and admit to the secrets. And that was this play, The Lepers of Ballybosta, which started me on the journey.
Wonderful, wonderful. It reminds me of the comment by the French theorist and critic and self-proclaimed communist Alain Badaud, who says that there's nothing like theatre there's nothing more real than theatre, you know, because it's the complete engagement with other human beings.
All in the same room. We're
That's
all
right.
live, right? And the blood is flowing through us. And the ephemerality of connecting with somebody on a stage, it's ephemeral, that you're connecting, but you can't understand it necessarily. But when somebody cries and you start feeling the tears welling up in your eyes, the catharsis that occurs, I mean, when it works, it really works. When it doesn't work, it can be brutal.
Yeah, that's right.
When it works, it's marvelous.
And it is a unique experience that I think we could say that it would we would have a better world if more people had the experience of theatre. Do you think? Do you think it has that kind of both catharsis capacity, but also a kind of empathy building, empathy capital, if you like?
I think very much so. I think many ways great theatre can illustrate issues that you can't articulate necessarily for yourself until you see somebody on the stage going through it. And then you start recognizing moments in your own life that you're starting to see in stage, and when they culminate together and you collate them, you can actually then understand something that you're going through yourself. And you don't realize it until the theatre kind of presents it to you. And that's where we get heroes and anti-heroes from, and those moments become really special. They're hard to create, and you also need great actors to be able to dig into their souls and transfer those emotions out into the audience. And it's sometimes dangerous to dig that deeply.
Well, we're encouraged not to. We're encouraged to avoid danger, aren't we?
Well, this is it. And that's why you need the theatre, right? You need that great actor to go deep into their soul, and then they limb that journey for you. And sometimes you don't even realize it's happening until it's over.
Yeah, that's true. I wanted to read this to you, Ronan, because it struck me as quite remarkable, which is, and you can tell me who wrote it, but it's about you. And it's connected with a play of yours called The Smuggler from the Jackalope Theatre Company in Chicago.
Yes.
And this is the description. And you know, you can throw your water at me if you really are upset by this, but here we go. Ronan Noone believes in playing with a myriad of elements to find the right way to tell a good story, a necessary story that tells us who we are, where we have been, and where we are going. He believes in stories that resonate beyond the theatre's door and that add ideas to the national conversation. He believes in the playwright as a thinker travelling in the direction of their fear.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with all of that, wouldn't I?
Well, I don't know. It's unfair for me to read that, really.
No, it's not. I mean, yeah, I'll stay humble. But at the same time, when you hear good things, like the one thing about theatre is, and it goes against the grain of being Irish at times, which is draw no attention upon yourself.
Right.
And say nothing until you hear more. And what does theatre do? It says if you want to put something on a stage and it isn't successful, you will be torn apart in the papers. The critics will come out. You will be known among the community too as that didn't work. And you'll carry that with you for a few years until you write the next piece. So in an interesting way, I pushed against the idea of saying nothing to hear more. Actually say as much as you possibly can. Say it until you hear more. Sing out loud. And I kind of enjoyed that idea of traveling in the direction of your fear, which obviously comes from a well-known poem. But that idea of traveling in the direction of your fear is kind of some theme that I've probably followed through most of my life. And plays are like that, right? Whether you're taking on the abuse in the Catholic Church or racism in Ireland, or you're taking on, you know, journalism and the lack of objectivity, or The Smuggler in that case, which is, you know, taking on smuggling and immigration and smuggling people in here for profit into America. Looking at it from many different sides, you're pushing against the narrative that is well known. I kind of have that, it goes back to that contrarian edge of making the priest walk out after 15 minutes.
What is it about the Irish then? Let's think a little bit about this long, wonderful tradition of Irish literature. Theatre, let's say, as a form of literature, but poetry, novels, generally speaking. What is it about the conditions, so either the social conditions or just the general kind of world of the intellect that brings the richness of the Irish imagination to the world?
Oh, there's so many variables involved, and I barely touch on any of them beyond being anecdotal. If you come from a small town, it's very, very difficult to find a place to put your ambition. And so oftentimes the best way to have that ambition is to live your day as if it's full of events, even the most minor event. And then within that event, find a narrative. And then take that narrative to the pub at night or at home at the end of the day and tell that story as a way to converse around the table. And then the better stories are recognized very quickly. And you take a particular joy in it. And you'll watch it, particularly with Irish people. They will gather in groups and tell stories to each other, not to up each other, but necessarily they're practicing like comedians. And you know you're going to hear that story in 2 years again, but they'll have a more finesse put into it. And so they're already finding that nature in them. And I think obviously it comes from a legacy of a tradition of the poet remembering stories through the tribes and holding on to the history of tribesmen and families in Ireland, and had the poet then handing down that history to their sons or daughters, who then carry that tradition in memory too, so that that idea of being a storyteller became part of the fabric of Irish life. And so when you then add to that where we take away our language, Gaelic, and now you actually still are able to speak English using the same geography of the sentence that Irish uses, gives it a twist and a lyricism to it that suddenly makes it quite beautiful and allows you to practice the art of the narrative. Everybody I know practices the art of the narrative over there.
So it's a national pastime.
Yeah, it is a national pastime.
Sometimes referred to as the gift of the gab, but that's to sell it short, no doubt.
It might be, yes. We have to kiss that Blarney Stone and all of that. We've no problem kind of selling ourselves in terms of some of the tropes that we see as Irish. But we'll turn it on its head when we need to and use it as a way to say, if there's an oppression going on, we'll speak to that. And we'll use our narrative to be able to tell that. And I suppose our narrative also comes from some form of oppression over a long time.
Well, we've seen very fine statements from, I would imagine, at least politically surprising places, prime ministers and so on in the current situation, saying that Ireland shares with the Palestinians a specific history, this kind of connection to oppression, this connection to the idea of having lost something.
Yeah, they did.
I
noticed that recently as well. I noticed that too, and I noticed it even when I was growing up. There was a lot of scarves that you see worn by students when I was growing up. But I think you'd see that in many places around the world where the Irish kind of find themselves saying, we recognise when things are out of whack.
Let's change tack for a little bit, if you don't mind, because I don't want to run out of time on giving you the opportunity just to talk about your plays and how you go about the specifics of identifying either topics or subject areas or approaches. For some of them, you've talked about already the lepers of...
The lepers of Baile Báiste, which reads as Baile be town in Irish, in Gaelic, and Báiste be rain, or a baptism, so it would be a rain town. So.
Oh, okay, right. So how do you go about what happens when, in the process of being away from home, let's say as an immigrant, being here in Boston, what kind of energies or forces do you think of as being at work if you were to sort of take a sort of metacognitive approach here and think about your own processes of writing?
Oh, that's a difficult question because at the moment too, I'm going through the phase where I'm like, what's the next subject I want to write about? And oftentimes it's a subject that that I feel the light needs to be shone on it. And how then do you tell that story, and at the same time, and I said it's not to be pejorative, how to make it entertaining in a way that people would say, okay, I'll come and see that story. How to not bore them, and at the same time not be teaching them anything. You're not in the business of teaching, you're in the business of putting fully three-dimensional characters on stage who move a story forward, and at the same time deal with issues, usually in a 2-hour period that oftentimes for you and I would take over 25 years or 30 years. So you're really compressing time in that, and then you're trying to have an arc to that story that reveals a climax. So for instance, The Smuggler, which you mentioned there, is a play that started because when I came to America, the first thing I saw, I went down to New York and I went to Ellis Island, and I saw an anecdote on the wall where this Italian man said he'd learned 3 things when he came to America because he had heard that the roads were paved with gold. He had learned that 1, the roads weren't paved with gold, 2, they weren't paved at all, and 3, he had to pave them. And so I took that with me in '94, and I went, oh, there's something good there. And then in around the early 2000s, I took some of the journalism skills, and I was working with a young Brazilian woman who wanted to tell me her story of having come across the river from Mexico into America. And she told me in translation, because I had a Portuguese translator with me, and she had heard I'd worked, as I said, in journalism, and she told me that when she came across, the coyote in the dark told her, keep your face down. And at the time, I think customs enforcement were coming through with flashlights, and they'd shine the flashlights across the field. And he said, keep your eyes closed, because the flashlight will capture the glint in your eye, and then they'll know you're there. So you have to keep your eyes closed. And I love the idea, not that I loved the idea, but the metaphor of having to keep your eyes closed when you're coming in to America as an undocumented person actually represents the metaphor of the way that America deals with immigration, and then particularly when it comes to refugees, asylum seekers, and the undocumented. The idea of keeping your eyes closed, not allowing you to shine a light on it in the right way. Those 2 ideas then start setting off an idea for me to start writing a play. Right. So then you find the right character, and then when you have the right character, you open the play with something like this: I am an American. I may not sound like it, but I am. And so even those first 3 words of the play document what the American dream is about, right? We come from all over the world where all the colours bleed into one, but you might have a different accent. But today I'm as American as I am Irish.
And we're here in Boston, and you live in Boston, you work in Boston, so we've got this very Irish town, Irish city.
Very much so.
Is that how you feel about it? Does it feel like a home away from home at all, or is there something else? Or is there a sort of level of comfort about it? I don't find it that way, but maybe you do in a more direct sense.
It's interesting, right? Because when we came over here, right, and you came from Australia, right, the connection you could make to Ireland or to wherever you came from was usually with some social club, or going down to a local bar, and maybe you bump into somebody. But now, I pick up my phone in the morning, the app is open to an RTE station, an Irish station, and you put that on, and next thing you're listening to the news in Ireland in real time. And you're hearing the accent, you're hearing what's going on, but you're not necessarily living over there. Yeah. And the sun is shining here, and the weather has been told that it's over there, it's raining. I'm not going to say, but it's true. I do like that sunshine, and I don't want the rain all the time. So both of those things help me out in terms of keeping my Irish. So yes, this is a home. This is home, right? This is where I have a family. But it's only 5 hours across the ocean, and next thing you're over. And in fact, if I think about it, Ireland in many ways has become more American over the last 30 years in the way I've witnessed things occur over there.
Yes, I'm afraid that I would say, sadly, that's the same in Australia. I don't think it's a good thing. I'm a great believer in what we might think of as indigeneity or indigenous national cultures,
Yeah, well,
rather than the great levelling of everything.
absolutely. And yes, there's a cultural heritage that you have to hold on to, and you pass it on, just like those poets from the past, right? They hand it on to the next group of people that come through, wherever they come from. But it's what makes you distinct, and it holds on to your identity. Going back to the very first thing you said, where's your accent from?
That's right. Yes, yes. The most recent play that of yours that was performed, and we've got 3 minutes left, this is unfair, but was The Thirst, which is a play that resonated with me because it explored women, particularly Irish women who came to the US, maybe to Boston, and worked in a domestic environment, right? Worked as domestics. And that's what my grandmother did. She wasn't in that, I suppose it's fair to say, she was Protestant. We're from a Protestant family, so she wasn't in that great other kind of upheaval, but it was a similar kind of resonance to this idea of, well, how do you make it, right? And often it's not all that easy, is it? Hasn't been, and this is maybe this is where one has to admit to both fear and also challenges of recognising how to describe oneself within this great movement, this migration.
I think I wrote Thirst, which tells the story of what goes on in the kitchen while Long Day's Journey into Night goes on in the living room. So the dysfunctional Tyrone family that O'Neill wrote about, I wanted to put something in contrast to that. So here was the women he mentioned in his play, and I turned those women into full-fledged characters. And I wanted this story to, in some way, encapsulate what that experience was like. I read the books, I felt the Irishness coming through me, and then I was able to actually tap into what it was like for me to leave, to uproot yourself, the deracination that occurs, and then to find a place to be able to put down those roots. It's never an easy struggle, no matter where you come from. And so oftentimes you can get lost in that battle. But in this case, I wanted to make sure that these women could see that there was a way to move forward. And the play actually in many ways is a tone poem to the idea of leaving home and then eventually finding home in America. Play I'm very proud of.
So you should be.
Thank
I
you.
think it's a wonderful body of work. What else have you got? Let's see in the last minute. What else have you got? So we looked. You've got some copies of.
Yeah, this was The Smuggler. This is the one you were just talking about, right?
Yep.
And the Lepers, which we started off. The Atheist. This is this is a play about a filthy journalist, which kind of put me on the map because I did it with Chris Pine at first, and then I did it with Campbell Scott, and I went on to do it in various places. And
Wonderful.
this is a piece that Brendan was also a piece. We did this at the Huntington. We did The Atheist. The Huntington did this, and which was basically a story of a young man who came from Ireland and is followed by the ghost of his mother, and he's being taught how to drive by a prostitute, and has all the kind of tropes of fun play, but yet tells a kind of like a lovely romantic story.
Mm-hmm.
And The Blow-In of Ballygal, there's a play that talks about racism in Ireland from all sorts of angles and point of views. This is Thirst, which you were talking about just there,
Yep.
which just was published recently, and that I was just telling you about. And this is just Boston Theatre Marathon. So this is, plays are collected here, and we do 50 plays over 10 hours every year in Boston, which 50 different theatre groups come to. And I just wanted to mention this because I think it's an extraordinary effort.
It is.
So these are all these plays. So
Thank you, Ronan. You've been busy and you've been a wonderful guest,
thank you.
and certainly been excellent to talk to you about these important efforts at putting theatre on the map and giving us your voice. So thank you for being here, and perhaps we can get to talk again about some other things to do with Ireland and writing.
I have plenty to say.
Okay.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And that's it from us. That's it from me, Marcus Breen, and from Boston Media Theory. Until next time, keep on mediating.